All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. Well, the clock has officially struck midnight for the New York Mets as their Cinderella run for this MLB season has come to an end. The Mets were sent home last night, courtesy of the Los Angeles Dodgers in the National League Championship Series, as it marked the end of one of the more interesting years in the history of this franchise. This was supposed to be a rebuilding year for the Mets, but they found themselves 2 wins shy of winning the franchise's sixth National League pennant. Now, on June 2nd, when the Mets were just 24 and 35, how many people out there really thought that this team was going to be playing October baseball, more or less finished with a winning record? You saw the Mets this season, and they were really a band of brothers, a cast of characters, any way you want to slice it. But they came together for a passionate season. They rallied their fan base in New York City, and of course, the rest is history. I mean, they had many rallying cries from Grimace to OMG, you name it. But at the end of the day, they said they just simply had a never say die attitude. And then, once they got it going, okay, towards the end of the first half, they just really started of the season. They just started to believe in themselves. It carried over to the second half. They had some ups and downs and ins and outs, but like we've always said, especially with this expanded postseason, just get in and anything can happen. And in the case of the Mets, they got in emphatic fashion. You go back to that double header after the regular season had ended for the other 28 teams. And the doubleheader against the Atlanta Braves, the Mets were down 3-0 going to the eighth inning, really nothing going on. And then they exploded for 6 runs. The bullpen gave up 4 in the bottom of the inning. And then Francisco Lindor coming back in the top of the ninth with that 2-run shot that got the Mets into the postseason. The Mets were basically down to their last out, if you will, in game 3 of the wild card round against the Milwaukee Brewers. And then you had Pete Alonso, who really wasn't doing anything in the postseason to that point, hit that what turned out to be the game-winning 3-run home run, beating their arch rivals in the Philadelphia Phillies in the National League divisional round. And then, of course, they just ran into a better, deeper, experienced team in the NLCS in the form of the Los Angeles Dodgers. But nonetheless, this was a season that was pieced together for the Mets because they were supposed to be rebuilding. Okay, uh, clearly exceeded expectations, and now with the off season, right around the corner for the Mets, they clearly have some important questions that will have to be answered sooner rather than later. First things first, the Mets have a slew of free agents that need to be signed. Uh, at the top of that list is going to be Pete Alonso, and I know throughout the season, Eves at the start of the season, rather, I'll start here. I'll say, listen, I expected Pete to have a big season as this was his walk year. He didn't. But, I think, what he did in the playoffs for the Mets, I think that's something that's going to be sitting on the minds of a lot of people within that organization. And I think the organization wants Pete Alonso to stay with the Mets. I think Pete Alonso wants to stay with the Mets. It's just going to come down to the right numbers for both sides, years and salary. But at the end of the day, I truly do believe that the Mets will get it done, and I don't see Alonso going anyplace. Pitching wise, because pitching around baseball is something that you can never have enough of, and of course, a lot of guys were on 1-year deals this year. Will New York resign both Luis Severino and Sean Manaea? Both became fan favorites. Both consistently gave the Mets quality starts. So that's going to be something that you have to ask yourself about. Jose Quintana. He was another starting pitcher for the Mets, oft injured though. Will New York bring him back? Then you look at your everyday players, picking up guys like Harrison Bader and Jesse Winker, and it's one of those. Jesse Winker, I really think he fit the mold of the idiots with the Boston Red Sox from about 20 years ago. He would have fit the mold with the '86 Mets. You kind of need guys like that on championship teams. You need a couple of guys like that, and I think Jesse Winker fit that mold. Will he be back? He quickly became a fan favorite with the Mets. Harrison Bader, he's been around the block playing for St. Louis, played for the Yankees, and now with the New York Mets as well. One thing for sure, third baseman Mark Vientos really solidified himself with his spot on the team. I know people who have been saying for the longest time, give Vientos a chance. Give Vientos a chance. He got his opportunity throughout this season, and then on the postseason stage, he really showed that what he's the real deal. You go back to the Milwaukee series, he had some big hits there, some big hits against Philadelphia, and I don't think any Mets fan is going to forget his grand slam in game number 2 of the LCS against the Dodgers for quite some time. So it looks like the Mets have their third baseman of the future. Now, aside from Vientos, New York does have some quality young talent in their system. We saw Luis Angel Acuna come up late in the season and have an impact for this team. Francisco Alvarez at catcher, Ronnie Mauricio, who the Mets are expected to have back healthy. And then there's Brett Beatty. I mean, you look at Brett Beatty, if there was a level of baseball between AAA and the big leagues, I think Brett Beatty would be perfect for there because he tears it up at the minor league level, just has to find a way to put it all together at the big league level. That's going to be interesting to see going forward for him. This season really showed that Francisco Lindor could become a leader for the Mets. I know that there were plenty of people who questioned the $341 million that Steve Cohen gave him in acquiring him from the Cleveland Guardians several years ago. But I think Francisco Lindor really answered the bell this year, his finest year in a New York Mets uniform. He became a leader. One thing that you noticed about Lindor, all these big home runs that he was hitting coming down the stretch and even into the postseason, it was an old school mentality to it. He hit the ball, saw the ball, and just rounded the bases, and that was it. But nonetheless, you think about some of those big shots, the big shot against Atlanta, even going back before that, big time hits during the season against the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were the defending National League champions at the time. You think back to the Milwaukee series, you think back to the Philadelphia series, and then, of course, when the Mets were down 0-1 in the LCS round to the Dodgers, who got the game started in game number 2 with a solo blast to kind of set the tone for the Mets. It was Francisco Lindor. Then on top of that, his hustle coming down the stretch. Lindor was not healthy. He was playing with a bad back. And you know what? That young man went out there and gritted it out every single day and left it all out there. And I think a lot of Met fans will appreciate that effort. Speaking of effort, the Mets look like they found their manager in Carlos Mendoza. Remember, this was a question mark coming into the season. He was an assistant coach with the New York Yankees. He was handpicked by Mets president of baseball operations, David Stearns. And you just had to wonder, at first if the rookie manager was the right guy for the job. But guess what? He kept his finger on the pulse of this team throughout the year. And he got this team 2 wins away from the pennant. Just one thing I question about Carlos Mendoza in his postseason run, especially in the series loss to the Dodgers, was staying with JD Martinez at DH. I think he did I understand trying to be loyal to the guy, veteran guy who's been there and done that, but unfortunately, at this state of the game, I think that JD Martinez is on his last leg at the MLB level. I feel like the Mets might have signed him 2 or 3 years too late. We saw him be productive with the Detroit Tigers, with the Houston Astros, and then, of course, with the Boston Red Sox when they won the World Series in 2018. And then following that with the Los Angeles Dodgers. But nonetheless, I think, throughout the series, Winker would have given them a little bit something more, especially in those home games at Citi Field, as opposed to Martinez. At the end of the day, the Mets ran out of gas against a better team. You look at the Dodgers, they just attacked and attacked and attacked Mets pitching throughout this series. And of course, one thing we know for sure, as series progress in the postseason, advantage hitters because they see those pitchers more often. bullpen issues, the Mets had their fair share at times. They strengthened when they needed to in those key moments. But again, like I said, the Dodgers were simply a better team, and it showed in this series. Like I said, the Mets, they're definitely going to look to upgrade their pitching staff, both starters and the bullpen over the offseason. And then, of course, another question that a lot of people are asking, will the Mets make a splash and go after Juan Soto? I think they will. It's one of those where I think Pete Alonso is going to be in the mix for them. I definitely think the Mets are going to put out a feeler for Juan Soto. I'll say this much: it would not surprise me to see the Mets offer Juan Soto more money than the Yankees, because I think they are going to be the two teams that are going to be the finalists for his services. Maybe Juan Soto uses the Mets as leverage to get more money from the Yankees. We got to wait and see. But nonetheless, I really do think that he will be coveted by both baseball teams that call New York City home. TFX, what's going on, my man? Long time. You're asking me, have I figured out my pick for the World Series as of yet? I'm going to take a little time to think about this. The series begins on Friday. Um, you got two good teams. And of course, we know that the media is going to run with the fact and say, hey, Yankees, Dodgers, lot of historical factors there. Of course, there are we're multiple generations removed now from when the Dodgers still called the New York City home when they played in Brooklyn. But nonetheless, a lot of historical factors in that one as well. And then, of course, people are going to be talking about Shohei and Aaron Judge, most likely the two MVPs of both leagues. So, to answer your question, no, I'm just going to take some time and let all the factors marinate in before I put that pick out there for you and everybody else, if that makes sense. But for Mets president of baseball ops, David Stearns, year one, you got to say was a success. This guy built the Milwaukee Brewers into being a perennial playoff contender in the NL Central, one of the smaller market teams in Major League Baseball. And he's going to do it again with the Mets. And not only that, but he has money to spend right now, courtesy of one Steve Cohen. And the Mets are in a very interesting situation here. I still think that they're going to go out there, they're going to try to find themselves a general manager to work alongside David Stearns. But I say they're in a very interesting situation because you've got a team owner who was a fan of this team. And then on top of that, you have a president of baseball ops who grew up as a fan of this team as well. So that I just think right there, in itself is very interesting for this club going forward. But speaking of Steve Cohen, he's really, changed the culture around this Mets franchise in a short period of time. I mean, the Mets do have history. Okay, I'm not going to sit up there and call them the lovable losers. They've been bad at times, and they've had their fair share of woes over the years. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. All right, but they do have their history as well. Steve Cohen is embracing that history, and then on top of that, he's changing the narrative around this team. And I mean, you look at him throughout this postseason run for the Mets, he was front and center with his team once they had their first home game of the playoffs in this postseason against the Phillies. City Field was electric, bringing back former players to throw out the first pitch for multiple games. You name it. At the end of the day, the landscape of this franchise is changing. And I'll tell you like this, with this postseason run that the Mets just had, how many tickets were just sold for next year, just based off of that? So I really do think, this guy has this organization headed in the right direction. I will say this about the Mets: this is something else that has to change. Maybe it does going forward, but they've never been able to keep that level of consistency as far as success going. Will that change? And also, nothing was expected from this team from this year. The expectations are going to change next year for the Mets. So, will they be able to live up to those expectations? We have to wait and see. But if you're the Mets, there's a lot of money coming off the books. Remember, Mets had the highest payroll this year, but a lot of those guys where those payroll figures factored into were no longer on the team on opening day, period. So you got a lot of that money coming off the books if you're the New York Mets. Steve Cohen has shown that he's not afraid to spend money. And it's not just about spending money, it's about spending the money on the right people. And to his credit, as opposed to his predecessors in the Wilpots, when things didn't work out with Justin Verlander, when things didn't work out with Max Scherzer, you know what? He shipped them out of town, was willing to eat some of their salary to get prospects back. Heck, he even a couple of years ago, when things weren't working out with Robinson Cano, he cut him a check and told him, thanks for coming and go home. Okay, that's something that the Wilpons would not have done either. So I think definitely things are changing. And like I said, with Steve Cohen, he's going to open up that vault over the winter and spend the money. So with the Mets, they've proven that they can hang with the big boys in the league. And I think, you know, beating the Phillies for them and their fans was big because that is an epic rivalry. Not in the north, not just in the Northeast, but in Major League Baseball, and it's basically anything Philadelphia, New York is always big. And when you think about the Phillies and the Mets, especially with their fan bases, there's absolutely no love lost there. So I think that is definitely something for the Mets to build off of. That's still going to be a very contentious division with the Atlanta Braves as well. The Washington Nationals are an improving team, and I think there's somebody that you got to keep an eye out for in 2025. But nonetheless, if you're the Mets, you held your own. Of course, there's only one team that's going to end with the ultimate holy grail in baseball. The Mets fell short. They gave their fan base an exciting run. You looked at the fans how they gravitated to this team over the second half of the season, especially in their postseason run. But at the end of the day, they simply just fell short against a better team. I think the Mets will definitely look to improve their roster. I probably say I'm 95% sure that, from an outsider's perspective, that Pete Alonso will be back. And I also think that Cohen is going to make a legit push at Juan Soto because he wants to win, but also he wants stars on his team as well. So let's see what the next step for the Mets is going to be. They had a great run here in 2024, and let's see if they're able to build off of it for bigger and brighter days for 2025 and beyond. But folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. TFX, my man, as always, it was a pleasure, Daddy-O. Thank you so much for chiming in. I'll definitely have some of that World Series information for you. And also, like you always ask, definitely check out from a football picks later this week. But once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.